You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 451 of the podcast. And in this one, I got back on Chrissie Hodges. Chrissie is a peer support specialist, founder of OCD Gamechangers, and author of Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. Chrissie was also awarded the Hero Award at the 24th IOCDF conference in San Francisco. In this episode, we discuss her new community, Grieving from OCD, the points of grief in Chrissie's OCD story, including her OCD onset, lost opportunities, love and sexual development, lost time, and stigma. We also discuss her grieving process, her difficulty of being involuntarily admitted to a mental health hospital, navigating anger and grief, self-compassion, figuring out who you are and what you want to do with your life as symptoms reduce, and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you to Chrissie for coming on, sharing this topic, discussing it from the point of view of her own story. And always, thank you so much for listening. I do deeply appreciate it. And without further ado, here is Chrissie. Back to the podcast, Chrissie.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. I love our discussions on things that not are always talked about in the community. So it's always an honor.
Yeah, yes, exactly that. It's great to have you on. Obviously, I saw you recently, the IOCDF, so it's good to catch up stateside. So, it's been a little while since you've been on. Actually, probably not. Yeah, a decent amount of time. Not a huge amount of time, but decent. Anyway, since then you set up your community.
I have.
So yeah, I guess just maybe what's new with you, and then also the community.
Sure. So I have done a lot in the last year to really build community with people for OCD. I really feel dedicated to that, the part of healing that comes in recovery or while you're working on recovery, that connection with other people that have OCD is really where it's at. I mean, this can help reduce shame and guilt and really, help with that isolation piece that can keep that cycle going with OCD, meeting people that have the same themes that you do. So, just mainly so you don't feel bonkers with it. And so I kind of started, of course, doing the one-on-one peer support years ago, and then moved into doing groups. And now I do 8-week closed groups for people. So now these people get to meet each other around the world. And it's so healing to be able to talk to some of these things. I actually can see people going through a hard time and then getting better, and we all support one another. And then I just thought to myself, okay, this is not enough. I want more. And then on top of that, doing the OCD Gamechangers in-person community building, which I can share with you in a minute, I decided that, really just being inspired by Natasha Daniels, who has AT parenting survival or surviving parenting survival, I decided to build an online community platform. Now, in this community, people can talk to each other. They can message one another, which is something that I can't provide in my own practice because I'm bound by confidentiality and HIPAA. And so, but in the community, people can connect, and they can connect over a forum. So you can type in things, you can ask questions. There's also a private Facebook group, but more so in the community, we have drop-in peer support groups every single week run by certified peer support specialists. I do community classes called Community Time, inspired by the wonderful Maggie Perry. And then I do events like having Stuart Ralph come on next Monday.
Next week,
right?
yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
I
Yeah.
need to check the calendar. But I have therapists come on and content creators and advocates so people can ask questions and we can talk about all the things that inspired them to do what they do. So this has been a venture that's only been going on for a few months, and I am loving it so far. Getting to see people connect, getting to just be completely immersed in that community has been amazing. So I only open up to the public 4 times a year, but if you email me and you are interested in being part of the community, of course, I will let you in. So just, feel free to take my information. I'm sure it will be here on the podcast, and email me if you want to be part of that or the 8-week groups.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes to the community
Thank you.
and your website. So obviously anyone listening to this, I've already been on your in your community because it's in the past now. Just to clarify, in case anyone suddenly joins and like, why isn't Stuart on this Monday?
I guess you'll have to come on again right after this airs.
Yeah. Do you record them and put them in the
Yes.
community? Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's the other thing is if you are in the community, other than support groups, obviously we wouldn't record those. But we do record all the community times because those are more class-like on recovery topics. And then we record all the events. And then I download them into an audio podcast and put them in the archive section. So you can go back and listen. And if they're, Phillipson is on, but he'll be already on by the time this airs. If you want to hear the Q&A with him, we just had Greenberg on. If you want to hear his Q&A, if you're in the community, you have access to all of that.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Well done. That sounds like a great place to connect. So we're going to talk about grief today. And one of the topics that came up in one of your community times,
yes,
or was the topic of the community time, is grief.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I just start with, just tell us about what do we mean when we say grief? Because obviously when people hear grief, they think, oh, they've lost a loved one and now they're grieving. But maybe what you're talking about is slightly different here. It's more grief attached to the OCD directly.
Yes. Grief is a very important topic for me personally, as far as an emotion that I needed to go through after my entire experience with OCD and getting treatment in the aftermath. And I had no idea how to do that. In fact, I had no idea I could do that or even should do that. And so I spent a lot of years post treatment where I considered myself in symptom recovery from OCD, believing I should just have the greatest life ever now that I know how to manage my symptoms. And that was not happening. And of course, because I have anxiety, the default was I must be doing something wrong. It's my fault. And which I still do. But really what I needed to do was grieve. Really what I needed to do was dissect my entire experience from the very beginning, from the day that OCD showed up and wrecked and changed my life forever, and allow myself to be sad and to be angry and to feel despair and to feel fear about the future, whatever. But no one ever gave me permission to do that. In fact, in my experience, it was very much this, okay, you've had treatment. Okay, now you're better. Now you have medication if you need it. We want to tie this up in a pretty neat bow and move on with life and pretend like nothing ever happened. And that is just not the experience for a lot of people with OCD, including myself. So grief, I feel like, is a necessary step in being able to enter and move through the emotional recovery of OCD. Now, I'm not saying that every single person has to do this. Lots of people probably don't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. I wanted to forget OCD. But it is, if you are capable and in a position to want to grieve this, you can, and you should, and you have permission to, because OCD offers very many areas in the experience, from onset to treatment to learning to live with OCD plus relapse, plus long-term recovery, lots of areas where grief can be part and can be very healing in moving forward and learning to live with OCD.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And your own journey, was that, well, what does that look like? Because obviously you've been on this journey for quite some time with OCD recovery. And what am I trying to ask here? I think I just want to know what does it look like for you? What did it look like for you? Like, was it at what point did you realize that you had to grieve something? And then when you realized that, what were, like, not the stages of grief, but like the process of that? Yeah.
And I definitely try not to look at grief in stages, especially in regards to something like this, because it's fluid. And it can be different. It can be completely different when you're in a lapse or a relapse than it would be if you are just living your life feeling like you're managing symptoms, but feel the need to grieve. So I can just kind of walk you through some of the areas, kind of the dark spots where grief didn't happen when I was experiencing OCD, and then what it was like for me when I did realize that was something that I could do in order to get a more in-depth healing about the OCD journey. I would say I have a lot of compassion for my 8-year-old self who found herself stuck in the classroom in third grade, trapped where someone was sick, and I developed emetophobia in that moment, having my first anxiety attack, having 30 pairs of eyes on me, almost probably making fun of me for, being stuck on the floor, not able to move, not knowing what was going on. And then all of a sudden developing this idea that I was being punished by God, thanks to religious scrupulosity. And I look back on her and I just think, oh my gosh, how terrified she must have been. And especially because I didn't, the second thought after all of this went through my head, or, there were tons of thoughts, but like the second big realization was, you can't tell anybody about this. Mainly because I don't think that anyone would have listened or taken me seriously or validated the severity of it, because I didn't really know the severity. I was a kid that was used to downplaying things because I had to take care of my own emotions. And so when this hit, I knew you cannot tell anyone. And I would give anything to be able to time travel and snatch that girl up and just hold her. Right. I would do anything. So the grief surrounding the onset, going home and just knowing my entire world had changed and not knowing why or what I had done wrong. Because typically in my life at that point, if things were bad, I had done something wrong or was told that I had done something wrong. So I had to accept some sort of consequence for being a bad person. So I just assumed this was that same thing. The other source of grief was the next morning when I went to bed thinking this will all be gone in the morning. And I woke up and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I remember that. And this was when I was 8. I don't have a lot of memories from those times, but I remember waking up and that rush of knowing I had to go to school and I might have to face this again, and the anxiety, and me putting the hair dryer on the thermometer to try to like show my mom I had a temperature of 250 or whatever. And her saying, no, you have to go to school. And I mean, when I think about that poor child, it like just the pain and terror, the tingling in my head, just the pounding in my chest, and just dragging myself into that classroom and then walking in and seeing that dude there that had barfed and being like, what is he doing here? So I had to relive the whole thing over again. I feel so sorry for her. And there's nothing I can do to take that away. I just had to grow up really fast. I had to grow up and learn how to function in a brand new world that I had no idea existed. I wish I'd never known existed. So that's probably the first area of grief. And then probably subsequently the next few years realizing, this is life now. This is not just I had a bad day, I had a bad week. Who at 8 even thinks that? But I did. And I knew it wasn't, because it was pervasive. Every day I lived to do compulsions I live to do that 30-minute prayer at the end of the day and that would hopefully keep me safe the next day if I did it correctly. And then, the next, I do think that I don't remember a lot about that time, but I do think there were parts during that time that I didn't get to experience being a real kid the way other people did. I had anxiety going to to Six Flags, the roller coasters. I was on constant hypervigilance and guard of people being sick. I would sabotage friendships. I had a friend come over one time and she threw up at my house and I did not speak to that poor girl for a month. And I was mean. I was mean to her, like ostracized her from our little friend group. Who does that? I was a horrible person for doing that. I have since apologized to her, by the way. It was bad. But anyway, so all these things that got kind of taken away from me as a kid that everybody else kind of takes for granted. That's a big source of grief and was for me. Moving on to when I became a teenager and then I developed sexual orientation OCD. The grief is strong here. First of all, just the same thing, just the idea that this thought entered my head and got so stuck onto that feeling of anxiety and that feeling of being trapped and isolated and I can't tell anybody about it. And then the only explanation I could think of was this is God's way of upping the ante. Maybe the fear of vomit isn't as bad anymore. So now we have to get something that's going to strike me harder, which of course is a teenage girl, like boy crazy or whatever. So it did feel like it was very much attaching to things that were important to me. And then from there, just thinking to myself, oh no, this is how it's going to be from here on out. A lot of people, I think, get hung up on the sexual orientation theme. And why, what does that mean if you get that? And what does that mean about you as a person? Well, I can tell you from the grief perspective that right there's so much grief about the loss of having a relationship and being in love with the sex that you want to be in love with, whether it's you identify as straight or you identify as gay and you're having sexual orientation OCD, it feels like a loss and there's grief there. I thought that I would never have the great love story that everybody else is going to get to have. Would I enjoy sex or would I always be questioning it? Would I feel pleasure or would I always be actually testing from a compulsion standpoint? So it really did destroy everything about how I viewed love and sex and everything else. So the grief was, and that lasted for me until I was 20. And so really it stole my entire adolescence. My whole childhood and adolescence was stolen by OCD. Now I have memories and I have some memories, but they're all tainted. I'm just not going to sugarcoat it here. Like I look back and I just think, oh gosh, the memories I do have, that I remember them because they were so acute with anxiety or I was doing compulsions, and I was, and it is strange. I did fall in love when I was a teenager, but there was always that grief of, are you really in love? Or are you just pretending? Are you just in denial? So yeah, the grief of all that time lost when I feel like, and I know that this isn't true, but it's very common for people that a lot of people just got to experience childhood and teenage years and got to do all the wonderful things and have all these amazing memories. And mine were always tainted with this horrible anxiety and fear about the present and the future. So those are just a couple ways, before treatment that grief was present, or that there were areas where, grief is necessary and it's validating to grieve.
Yeah, well, it what am I trying to say? It honors your past experiences, and if we take 8-year-old you who ghosted her friend for a month, that because you said, Yeah, you said I'm a horrible person. No, maybe what you did wasn't great, but it doesn't make you a horrible person.
It was
Actions may have been
survival.
horrible, but yeah, but it was from a place of survival. Yeah, 100%. Um, yeah. So yeah, so forgiveness there, but compassion. Yeah, okay. There was someone else I was going to say there, but I am forgetting. Yeah, and I get the whole, your sexual development and your social development and all of that through those teen years, so formative in figuring out who we are as people and our development, and OCD and other mental illnesses can really impact that development period and feel like it's slowing us down in some ways, is slowing us down and affecting those developmental windows. Which you can jump through later on in life, but it can really put a spanner in the works. Absolutely.
I mean, you think about the times of your life that you look forward to when you're a little kid, you're sweet 16 or whatever, learning how to drive. And, if you're learning how to drive and worried you're running over people, or, your prom and graduation and things like that. And, prom was a huge one for me where, every single prom that I went to, I would sit in the house beforehand and be like, do I really want to go to prom with a man or boy? They weren't really men there, with a guy, or do I want to go with a girl? Am I going to get there and I'm going to get a groinal to looking at the girls in their dresses? Like, I can't even be present for this, I was so excited when, my boyfriend at that time asked me to prom, and as prom approached, it was, I sabotaged the whole thing in my brain out of fear and terror. Graduation, the same thing. I don't know what I'm going to college. What am I going to do if I get there and freak out? People sometimes go away. You're having intrusive thoughts. About harm, and you have a roommate. I mean, it's all these things that people can't wait and they look forward to in life, and we get there and we're dreading it, or we avoid it. So, some people lose a lot of those opportunities. Because I feel like the only reason why I didn't lose a lot of those opportunities is that I was putting on this facade for the world, which is also a source of grief. I grew up as this, you probably wouldn't like me back then. A lot of people, I didn't even like me, but I was this, perfect goody two shoes that, wanted everybody to think I was the perfect religious person, straight A's, everything. When that's not who I really was. That was who I was pretending to be, to mask this horrible, dark side of me, or I thought was this dark, ugly monster inside of me. But as long as the world thought that I had all my shit together, it did not matter. And when I was diagnosed with OCD after a suicide and hospitalization, which of course has been a huge source of needing to grieve. When I was diagnosed, Stu, the first thing I did was look back and go, I was elated, of course, that it wasn't my fault. But the first thing I really thought was, I have no idea who I am. This person I have created was a lie. I mean, is it a lie? Yeah. It was a lie, but it was kind of like you said before, it was a lie for survival. I did what I had to do to survive, getting manipulated by my brain every day of my life. And looking forward, how terrifying is that at 21 years old, I have no idea who I am, what I believe, because I had religious scrupulosity. So that all went to hell, no pun intended, but it did. And now what do I believe? Do I want to believe in a God that punishes me with these horrible things? Is that even what God is? How I'm behind everybody. I'm 21 years old, spending time in a mental hospital. Like, who is going to love me? Who wants, what if people know this baggage? I am damaged goods. And then of course I went right back to school and put the face on again. And I just thought, we just got to get through college and be the same person I was before. But fundamentally I had changed. And so now I'm living a double life that's hiding a real secret. I'm someone that's mentally ill. I have this huge past, but I can't let a soul know. And that was the big grief for me in my adult life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then, yeah. And what age were you when you were in the psych ward? Well,
I was 20 when I went into the mental hospital, and then I was 21 when I received treatment from Dr. Phillipson.
Okay. Yeah. So at 20, that's, for it all to come crashing at that point. You've kind of made it through those teen years, the developmental period. Of course, your brain is still developing up to 25. But yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? I mean, you don't need me to tell you that, but
it's nice to hear that, though. In all honesty, it's nice to have that validated, because sometimes, just like I felt like I had to do with OCD, is I just look over that. Well, it happened. Just pick myself up by my bootstraps and keep going. But no, I don't. I can leave those bootstraps on the damn ground if I want to. It was a real, having OCD. I say this a lot. Having OCD is so, so hard. And we minimize it for the sake of not wanting other people to know that we have a mental illness, or by not wanting to burden people, or just because we don't want to face the harsh truth that this is a very hard illness to live with, especially with no tools. It gets easier when you learn tools, of course, but that's where the grief is very relevant.
Yeah.
It's first understanding just how difficult this is to survive.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, for me, I think I have processed it in therapy somewhat, but I think for a long time, I didn't even want to reflect on it in any meaningful way, because it's like putting my head in the sand, like, why spend any more time on it? But yeah, I did process it, but I didn't want to,
Mm-hmm.
And even now, I don't want to go back and think about it in detail, because it's too much. I
mean, I think that's common, and I think it's something that isn't talked about a lot, is the idea that people want to get to symptom recovery and say, goodbye, OCD. I'm gonna head for the hills, and I never had to do. I never have to look. I never want to even think about that. Let me just go live my life, which is what I did in my 20s. Mm-hmm. But I had a B, but I don't remember what the B was. The B will come back to me. I think that that's okay. I think denial serves a purpose. Mm-hmm. It's the relapse that gets you. It's the relapse. It's that brings you back from head toward the hills. It pulls you back in, and that's when the reality hits of, this is what they say it is. It is an illness that stays with me. It's the way that we don't have to call it an illness. It's the way that our brains work that will pull me back in. And I do have to face this again, but there's a scary part right there. Is facing it again going to take me as far down to rock bottom as I was before? And that's terrifying for people. Just like what you said, you don't want to remember it. You don't want to process it because it was so much. So I don't want to relapse, because I don't want to go back down there, because I was terrified and it was lonely and I had dark thoughts that I never want to think again.
Yeah.
About ending my life or whatever else. And that can make people bolt the other direction when they get help, or when OCD kind of goes dormant for a little bit. Oh my gosh, I'm free of this. I'm going to go back. But it will pull you in. It will pull you in again. And that is a lot of the times where people have to face it, and they have to face the grief. And sometimes people don't have tools to do that. And sometimes people don't think they have permission to do that. And so I wanted to say today that you have permission. If you need it from someone, I'm giving it to you today.
Yeah. Nice. I like it. I think it's an important message. And for you, you saw Phillipson at 21. Mm-hmm. That was pretty successful from what over the phone, right? Because Zoom Zoom didn't exist back then.
Video didn't exist.
Yeah, it was just ERP over fax.
It was. It might as well have been. We did phone ERP. I had no idea what Phillipson looked like. There wasn't even a photo of him on his AOL account, OCD Zone.
Oh yeah.
Yes, it was successful. I was shocked that it was successful because I had every fear that everybody else does going into therapy. This isn't going to work. I'm going to find out these thoughts are real, blah, blah. And I did exactly what we were just talking about. When I was symptom free, my brain went, oh, we're done. I will never deal with this again. And so I'm going to go live my life, because I always thought to myself, if I don't have these thoughts, life will be grand, life will be amazing. And so I became a flight attendant for 9 months. And then I packed up my car and headed out to Colorado. I was like, the mountains are going to cure me. Where was I wrong?
They've been helpful, haven't they?
Been helpful for sure, but certainly didn't cure things.
No.
But I took OCD with me. I wanted to believe that effective therapy meant that it was gone for good. And it wasn't. And I struggled. I suffered pretty badly with different themes that I was unable to recognize through my 20s. My relationship OCD, stuff attached to injuries, kind of how I've had recently in my life, actually some harm OCD, things like that. But the grief was the hardest. I was still hiding this from people. I'd created this whole life in the mountain town here in Colorado, and nobody knew what I'd been through. And I was desperately trying to forget it. Oh, and you just can't. Denial was fading. And I didn't know what to do, because I thought acknowledging it would mean that I was sick or could be sick again, or that it was a reality. I didn't want, like you said, I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want people to think I was weak because I had attempted suicide and been hospitalized. There was so much that if I could go back to Chrissie when she was 25, I'd just shake her. I did not like her. I would shake her and I would be like, you need some peer support. That's what I would tell you. You need some peer support. I wanted to be as far away from being mentally ill as possible in that phase. I think it was necessary, but it was very destructive. Very destructive.
I think that the taboo of going into a mental institution or psych ward or whatever, the taboo and shame that must have come with that, of what does this say about me? Or I'm not comparing that to inpatient to anyone listening. I think what you went through is different. It was after a suicide attempt. It wasn't you're going in for planned treatment.
This is behind a locked plated glass.
Well, there you go. Obviously, there can be shame for some people going inpatient, but I think this is a different situation. And I think then trying to process that of what does that say about me?
Stu, there's something to be said when your rights are taken away from you.
Yeah.
As just a normal consumer walking around every day, I went from I was depressed and miserable right before the suicide attempt, of course, but I went from a regular citizen walking down the street to I have no rights. I was involuntarily admitted and angry about it. And I think that when you find out that can happen, man, it scares the bejesus out of you. It was terrifying to me to think that it could get that bad, that I could have everything stripped away from me, and be in a facility where I was treated the way that I was treated, subhumane. So all of that.
And you, 100%. And you basically work with those institutions now, right? Through one of your businesses?
Yes. So I run a government contract that puts peer support specialists in the state institutions. The state institutions are a little bit different. One of the institutions it's a forensic hospital. So people are in there for sometimes decades. And then the one in Denver, it is, I mean, this is trauma informed as I can, but the sickest of the sick, meaning there's nowhere else for people to go sometimes, and they don't have the treatment, they don't have the resources. And I worked in that state facility for 2 years as a peer support. And then now I hire and supervise peers in there. And having peer support is a huge step forward.
Yeah.
It's very trauma informed, and at least it gives the patients somewhat hope that recovery is possible.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of hope. You can't find hope anywhere in those kind of facilities sometimes. So that's what the peers try to bring.
Okay, nice. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, but a nice kind of full circle moment to go back into the place that was terrifying for you.
It was. It was hard too. It was very triggering and traumatic. A lot of vicarious trauma, actually. And but I feel like it was healing, almost like exposure. I had not processed or grieved that scenario until I had to work in a facility that was a locked facility. And the patients helped so much with my own grief. I grieved alongside them. It was pretty amazing and very healing. Doing peer support work is phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in it. Because I think sometimes in therapy, the therapist has the pressure of like, oh, I have to make this person better, to put it crudely. And I'm not saying you're not trying to help in that way, but you're not making those promises, right? And
that's not my role.
A therapist technically shouldn't make those promises anyway, but that is the kind of expectation. But yeah, so I think there's something about peer support that has more time to just sit there in the process and what comes up and be with grief or whatever else, because we're not necessarily focused on symptom reduction. It's helping the person where they're at. Yeah.
I think that peer support, I mean, what we do is we come alongside people and walk with them wherever they're at, with no intention of steering them down a different path than the one that they get to choose. And I don't think that we have a lot of those rights in mental health. In particular, if you are hospitalized or if you are under the care of med management, just being honest, there's not a lot of shared decision making, and peer support helps inform people that they have the power. They can be empowered in their own recovery. It was a peer support specialist that helped me actually with the grief. So this is kind of a good segue of, I received peer support. He was kind of my mentor. So it wasn't like technical peer support, but it was, because on a peer support team, we are peer supporting each other. And so this gentleman was my mentor, and I had not shared my story very, very much at that point. It was very early in my career. And he asked me one day to share, and I sat down with him for a couple hours actually, and I shared it with him. And his first question to me after everything, especially about the isolation and the secrecy of it all before and after treatment, is he said, "Aren't you mad?" It's like, whoa, anger, it's off limits. I said, I don't know. Am I allowed to be mad? I mean, that was my response. Am I allowed to be mad? And he said, why wouldn't you be? And I was like, I don't know. Because I got through it and here I am. And he said, but aren't you mad? And then I didn't know how to answer him, because I was not allowed to be angry as a child. Right. I mean, I could be angry, but it was labeled as wrong or inappropriate. And so I developed that. I didn't even know how to be angry, because when I would be angry, I would assume that, or be told that, that it's not appropriate. Just say that. And so it took me a little bit to kind of understand what he meant. But once I opened the door to being angry about my experience, I also opened the door to being sad and to learning how to grieve what I went through. And what I mean is, when I say learning how to grieve, because I think a lot of people are confused by what that means. Does that mean I have to sit down and go through every single, moment and cry about it? No. That's not. But I think what it really is looking it in the face for what it is. A lot of times people with OCD, and I can say this because I did it, minimize the actual suffering to ourselves in an effort to say, I don't want to, or to portray, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want people to know. And then often it's juxtaposed with this hostility of, if people only knew. So there's like these conflicting feelings going on, and we don't know what to do with it because we're so busy surviving it. And so when I had to actually look back on what I went through, as painful as it was, because there were some dark moments, dark weeks, dark months, I really feel like that was the first time I developed self-compassion. And I know we talk about this like a buzzword, and it's annoying to people because self-compassion is hard to cultivate.
Yeah.
But that was the first time I could see myself almost objectively through someone else's eyes, who said, aren't you mad? Because I would be. I didn't even know what to be mad about. I didn't even know what to be sad about, because I didn't allow myself to feel connected to who had gone through that and survived. I was a strong ass kid and teen. I look back on the things that I survived and kept silent and kept straight A's and went to college on a full ride. How did I do that? And so I was able to look back on her and go,
it's impressive.
Man,
yeah,
there actually is maybe some good about me, and it's not just all bad, mentally ill. I'm damaged goods, which I had been telling myself for years. So the grief helped me see this different side of who I was. And I could very slowly start learning to love her. And that was like when I was 33, and it's 14 years later, and I'm still in that process, just to give you some perspective.
Yeah, it's a journey. No, you're right. And I see that a lot in my clients, where they may be beating themselves up or feel like they've achieved nothing, and they're doing stuff that's like impressing me. And I'm like, what do you mean you've not done anything? It's just in their head. It's not what they wanted to do. It's not what they thought they could have. They thought they could have done more. But to the outside world, they've been a success. Obviously, that's not going to be the case for everyone, but I think people are really hard on themselves. And it's looking at, well, what did I do even with this thing? Because even if it was just get out of bed each morning, that's massive for some people, you know.
I think OCD. I'm sorry.
I was to say, even if you couldn't get out of bed every morning, because I'm sure there's some people listening that had that, you've done something, pushed through at times, you know, gone to somewhere where you know, a party when you didn't want to go, but you knew it was healthy for you, or whatever it is. Like it's praising those efforts. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say a very bold statement, and I have no data to back this up, but I'm going to say it anyway. For a lot of people, OCD strips you of your worthiness. Mm-hmm. It just strips you of it. And whether that be, I could have been someone different. I lost the person that I was before. I wish I could be that person again. Mm-hmm. I'm behind in life. I always have this looming over me that I have that I could relapse. What if I get low again? And then I'm going to, you know, then I recover and now I have to grieve it. It just seems like there's trap after trap, and it strips you of your ability to see that you have worth. Because a lot of times we turn on ourselves. Mm-hmm. This must exactly how I described it when I was a little kid. I must have done something wrong to deserve this. Mm. And at the end of the day, I could have every single neuroscientist come and say to me, you have OCD. We saw your brain scans. This is OCD. I still would somehow be like, yeah, but remember that time I looked at dirty magazines? That must be why I got sexual orientation OCD, you know, or I did this and I killed that ant and that's why I got emetophobia, you know, whatever. my brain keeps wanting to believe that I could have prevented this.
Yeah.
So for 2 decades, I did exactly what your clients were doing. Or a lot of people with OCD, which was, I've got to fill this worth cup inside of me. I've got to do something external outside of myself to feel worthy and to believe that I'm worthy of love or acceptance, or that I will be lauded somehow by other people or the world, because I ain't good enough. I can't fill that cup of myself, because look at what a disgusting human being I am, and I must have done something to cause it. So people fill it with what? They fill it with success in their jobs. They fill it with having babies. They fill it with getting married. They fill it with trying to be famous, trying to be relevant. Athleticism is a big one too. Yeah, drugs. Yeah, I fell into the trap of substance abuse for sure. So now I'm trying to fill myself up. So now I feel worthy, and it just doesn't work. I mean, just in humanity in general, that doesn't work. But for OCD, that's why you already feel behind. And then you feel like when you can't fill that worth cup with external devices, it just makes things worse. I do want, if anyone's listening that feels this way, my 20s were so tough. I saw friends getting married. I wasn't ready, because I was still dealing with the turmoil of what had happened to me. I didn't feel like I had a job that was fulfilling. I wasn't making a mark. I wasn't doing anything of relevance. I felt like a failure in my family, blah, blah, blah. I've been this burden. The 20s were so hard for me. I just comparing to other people. The 30s got a little bit better, and the 40s have been amazing. But that was through a lot of therapy, and also finding secure attachments and realizing that worth comes from within.
Yeah, good way to say it. And self-compassion, as you said, it is a bit of a buzzword, but I use compassion-focused therapy as a therapy which came out of the UK, and with my clients, it takes time to get them to build that inner compassionate voice. You're going against years of conditioning.
Yes,
whether that's because of OCD or other factors. So it takes time, but it's worth doing. It's worth doing because life's better when you have that compassionate voice in your head.
It's also a choice.
Yeah.
Self-compassion is a choice, and it's not easy sometimes. So don't beat yourself up if you can't practice self-compassion. Some days are easier, but if you continue to choose compassion over and over and over, you're right. It's a skill you develop.
Yeah, it's a skill, and then you have to choose to do it. Yeah. I automatically called myself an idiot the other day over something. It wasn't a big deal, but that was my automatic response. And then I had to go, oh, no, I'm not. I'm just a human, and I messed up. So I had to bring that in. But my default was still the inner critic of I'm an idiot. But that's okay. So when I am hard on myself, I've got the skill now to be nicer to myself.
Yeah.
And then I let it go. Whereas if I hadn't done that, I would have been ruminating about it, overthinking about it, and I would have felt absolutely shit by the end of the day.
Yeah.
And something else I think that's been coming to my mind, probably because, mutual friends of ours and stuff, but throughout the time of doing advocacy, I've met tons of advocates at IOCDF, Gamechangers, all the events. And I saw some of them in the early days, like 7 years ago, 8 years ago, and you could see how much there's a few that stick out in my mind that were kind of grieving the loss of time and opportunities and love interests and people in their lives. And then I see them where they're at now, and it's leaps and bounds ahead. They've got most of the things they wanted out of life. And so I guess I just wanted to share that change does happen, even if you've been held back 20 years, 30 years, it can completely flip on its head.
Well, and I also think, especially if we look back that long, like 7 years was about when we all started, first Gamechangers event, really 7 years ago. I think that Gamechangers just as an example, and this doesn't have to just be Game Changers, this can be anything. Game Changers had this unique ability to bring people together that and inspire one another in their own projects, but also in their own recovery. I mean, we sat in this room up in Morrison, remember, or Evergreen. And I remember looking around at all these people and with different projects and that had different experiences and walking away going, oh man, if Stu can do this, I can do this. You know, if Allison Dotson can, if Margaret can, if Stephen Smith can, and Aaron Hart, you know, if all these people can do this. But that's not only about advocacy, that's also about recovery. If Stu got through what he got through with OCD, when I'm feeling down next, I can lean on knowing that he did, you know, and then he, you know, just gotten married and, you know, has this great podcast. And if he can do these things, I can do these things. That's where community is so important. That's where community does help with grieving and does help with shame and does help with feeling stuck and not worthy. It's just like any other community. It's just that we all have the common denominator of fucked up thoughts.
Yeah, true. So I guess I wanted to ask about, you know, people have gone through recovery, like almost grief aside. Any words on like, what am I trying to say? Learning to live. That's not what I mean, but like learning to live after OCD, like figuring out, especially if it affected their teen years and stuff like that, like their identity and all of this, and how do people go about figuring out who the hell they are, you know, and what they want to do with their life and be and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, this is a big thing that isn't talked about a lot of when people are saturated with OCD, and sometimes for years and years and years and years. And kind of like I was saying, when I was diagnosed, I had no idea who I was, and I was just pissed about it. I feel very lucky and fortunate that I could escape my environment, which was the South in the United States, but that was perpetuating the religious scrupulosity. You know, kind of at every turn, I was being reminded of these things. So I had the absolute privilege to be able to bolt and go somewhere I wanted to. So Colorado, you know, I just knew I wanted mountains. That's all I knew. I picked a thing on the map and went. I know that I was very lucky. But one of the things that I think it inadvertently did for me was I had to find out who I was in a completely different environment. I had to meet new people. So this is the ultimate exposure, right? I got out of that whatever was there. It wasn't avoidance. It just was, I wanted to start a new life and find out who Chrissie was. And so I went and learned how to mountain bike and learned how to ski and all these things that I'd never done before, which were terrifying. But you know, and then kind of from there, just explored life. It was not easy. I'm certainly not wanting this to come across as like, oh, you went to Colorado and found yourself and now you're happy. No, but I do think it's okay to not know who you are and to be curious. Okay, well then who am I going to be? And how do I cultivate these things in my life that I've never had or I've never had time for? I've been too scared, one thing at a time. You know, if that's weekly going and sitting in a coffee shop by yourself and having a cup of coffee and reading a book, do it. Start finding out who you are with OCD. I say that because I know people are going to be like, no, I don't want it. But it is part of your life. But without the crippling symptoms that you're having to survive. It's, yes, life is different for me after treatment. And I also had to let go of how do I want to say this? I was so desperate to fill kind of this shell of a person that I was, that like we discussed earlier about the worth, I was trying to fill it with everything. And it really wasn't until I got to a point where I thought, I need to really learn to love myself. And I had to stop people pleasing, which is very hard for those of us with OCD. I had to stop people pleasing in order to show up for me. Now, if I could share a story really quick, if that's okay.
Yeah.
One of the biggest changes one of the biggest ways that happened was going through actual grief. So a couple years ago, I don't even remember how long ago it was, I went through a breakup from a person I had been dating. And that breakup kind of symbolized a lot of losses that I'd had, I think, in the previous few years. And also, I think a lot of work I had done on trauma stuff from childhood, lots of culminations of things. Remember, I did not know how to really grieve, because I've been scared of grief. Because grief feels like anxiety. What if I get in it and I get trapped and I never get out? Plus, grief sucks. It's painful when it's forced on you, right? And so I went through a bout of grief for a culmination of things for months, and I couldn't get out of it. And I was scared, and I actually did kind of exposure on it. I thought, okay, this is a heavy emotion. I don't know what to do. So every day I would sit down and I would allow myself to feel the grief. I would show up for myself. It wasn't like ERP, but it definitely was just, I'm going to embrace this for what it is. Went all the way through it, saw Stu right at the tail end. I was in the UK for a little bit to try to do that final push. And once I came out of that grief, I realized the feeling passed for me. It was hard, just like going through months and months of OCD is hard and scary. But once it passed, I remember feeling like the dust settled and I was standing on 2 feet and I was like, I did it. I can self-trust that I can get through this stuff. And it was the first time I think ever in my life I thought, I can trust myself and love myself enough to get through the toughest times in my life. Now, isn't that ironic? Because look at what I went through when I was 8 years old to 20. And that didn't occur to me then. And that was really the toughest time of my whole life. And it took being in my mid 40s and going through something like that to say, I can do this by myself. I have worth. I have strength. A lot of people with OCD, I think, don't know that. We have this amazing resilience, like no other. But really coming out of that and going, I can go through some of the hardest shit and come out and be okay, was a life changer for me and really helped build my worth and really helped me to have self-love and self-compassion. Yeah. And the reason why I wanted to share that is I don't want you to be afraid of going through these really hard emotions, because you can get through. You can complete them. You can get to the other side. It's just scary for us because we're so scared pain isn't going to end. We're so scared we'll be stuck forever. These are all themes of OCD, right? Like, what if this never gets better? We're so scared of emotion, anger, fear, grief, but you can. It's just like anxiety. You just have to allow yourself and have that, that belief that you can get through it. And on the other side, you will be stronger. So I felt like that experience very much mimicked what I go through with anxiety. And it was a game changer for me.
Yeah, I like that. And the cliche saying, feel to heal, comes up. You got to feel it to heal it. Oh, really?
I like
yeah,
that.
okay. Yeah.
It was very true.
Yeah, but with OCD and anxiety, we typically don't want to feel these things. We push them away, and that's why they keep coming back.
Yes.
Rather than working through it.
Yes. Yeah. And out of fear, a lot of it is out of fear that what if I can't get through it? What if it never, because we tend to be past focused or future focused. What if it's never the same as it used to be? What if it never passes? And really, we get through emotions all the time. It's just that when we're overwhelmed with them, just like with anxiety, it's okay to recognize I'm scared this is never going to pass, but I'm going to push into it anyway. and trust myself. And I think some of us have a hard time trusting ourselves that we can. We're stronger than we think.
100%. And I mean, that's where a therapist can help there of working through that, you know, if you don't want to do it alone. Yeah. Nice. So is there anything else on this topic you wanted to cover?
I also wanted to just say that there are some people that don't grieve OCD, and that's okay too. And you don't have to go through the grieving process if you don't want, and you don't have to feel it. I just wanted to bring it up because it is a source. It's an emotion where people can get stuck. Yeah. It's almost like that. You know, if that is a stepping stone in your recovery, you may not know where to go from there, but still may feel some sort of doom, or still may feel some sort of, you know, pull or attachment to the past. And grief sometimes can unlock that. And I also want to say, just like I explained before, don't be afraid to grieve, and don't be afraid to reach out and get support in the grief, because people with OCD get it. We get it. And even if someone hasn't gone through grief or doesn't want to, they're still going to understand. And that's what, you know, like my community and my support groups and peer support in general can really, really help with is to walk alongside you while you grieve, so you don't have to do it by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And let's say you can pick up the phone and call 8-year-old you.
Oh.
What do you tell her?
I would probably just cry. She'd be like, "Do you think I'm gonna throw up?" I mean, oh God, what would I tell 8-year-old Chrissie? I think I would just, I mean, initially I would say go get therapy, but I don't think that anybody would take 8-year-old Chrissie seriously. I would, oh my God, I would just sit on the phone with her and I would be like, I know how scared you are. I know how awful this is. I would just peer support the hell out of her. I'd be like, I'd probably tell her all the times that people did barf in the classroom so she could miss school that day.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I would love on her. She deserves it, and she needed it.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Powerful. And yeah, I mean, thank you for talking about this topic and sharing from your own experience. I appreciate it. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much grief around living with OCD. There's so many different areas that you can have it. I just wanted people to know that it's a natural and sometimes necessary part of the recovery process. It's very, very healing, and it helps to do it while you have support of a therapist or a peer support, or someone that's really able to walk alongside you while you go through it.
Yeah, true. Well, thank you again.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for always having me on.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. And if you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.